In the heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where rolling green hills meet traditional Amish farmlands, a story of redemption and unexpected bonds was about to unfold. The Stoltzfus family, known throughout their community for their gentle ways with animals, would soon face their greatest challenge yet. When the most feared and aggressive horse in the county, a massive black stallion named Thunder, who had injured 3 previous owners, was set to be put down, 62-year-old Samuel Stoltzfus made a decision that shocked everyone. Against all warnings and the pleas of his worried family, he decided to adopt the dangerous animal. What happened in the months that followed would not only transform the horse, but reveal a heartbreaking secret that would bring the entire community to tears and change everything they thought they knew about both man and beast. The autumn morning mist hung low over the Stoltzfus farm as Samuel adjusted his black suspenders and gazed across the pasture where their gentle draft horses grazed peacefully. At 62, his weathered hands told the story of a lifetime spent working the land, but his kind blue eyes still held the same compassion that had drawn his late wife Sarah to him 40 years ago. The sound of buggy wheels on gravel interrupted his morning reflection as his son Jacob approached, his face etched with the kind of concern that had become all too familiar since Sarah's passing 6 months earlier. "Dad, you need to hear this," Jacob said, climbing down from the buggy with the heaviness of a man carrying troubling news. At 34, Jacob had inherited his father's sturdy build, but carried the weight of responsibility for both his own young family and his increasingly isolated father. "I was just in town and Sheriff Morrison was asking around again about that black stallion, Thunder. They're planning to put him down tomorrow morning." Samuel's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in his eyes. Thunder was legendary in their small community, not for his beauty or speed, but for his unpredictable violence. The massive black horse had been through 3 owners in 2 years, each one ending up in the hospital. The most recent incident had left Tom Bradley with a broken arm and cracked ribs, after Thunder had seemingly attacked without provocation during a routine feeding. "That horse has the devil in him. Everyone says so," Jacob continued, studying his father's face for any sign of the reaction he expected. "Doc Peterson says he's never seen an animal so filled with rage. Even the horse whisperer from Philadelphia refused to work with him after seeing what he did to that fence post, kicked it clean in half." But Samuel was remembering something else entirely. 3 weeks ago, while delivering fresh vegetables to the Henderson family on the outskirts of town, he had taken a different route home and passed by Tom Bradley's property. There, in a small, cramped paddock, barely large enough for the massive animal, stood Thunder. The horse wasn't displaying the aggression everyone talked about. Instead, Samuel had witnessed something that haunted him ever since. The animal was standing perfectly still, his head hanging low, making a sound Samuel had heard only once before in his life. It was the same keening wail Sarah's old mare Gentle had made the night before she died, not from pain but from a loneliness so deep it seemed to come from the very soul. "Jacob," Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying that particular tone his son recognized from childhood, the one that meant his father's mind was already made up. "What if everyone is wrong about Thunder? What if that horse isn't filled with rage, but with something else entirely?" Jacob felt his stomach drop. He had seen that look in his father's eyes before, usually right before Samuel did something the whole community would talk about for months. "Dad, please tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking. That horse is dangerous. He could kill you." Samuel walked to the split-rail fence and rested his arms on the top rail, watching their own horses move peacefully through the morning routine they had known for years. "Your mother always said that the most broken things in this world just need someone willing to see past the brokenness to what's underneath. Remember when she brought home that half-dead barn cat that everyone said was wild and mean, scratched and bit everyone who came near? That was different, Dad. That was a cat, not a 1,500-pound stallion with a history of violence." "Was it different?" Samuel turned to face his son, and Jacob was struck by how much older his father had seemed since Sarah's death. "That cat lived with us for 12 years and slept on your mother's lap every evening. She named him Blessing, Remember? Because she said the most unexpected blessings often come disguised as the things we're most afraid of. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle. Sheriff Morrison's patrol car kicked up dust as it turned into their driveway, and Jacob felt his anxiety spike. The sheriff only visited their farm when there was serious business to discuss. Samuel Jacob, Sheriff Morrison nodded as he approached, removing his hat out of respect for their customs. At 55, Bill Morrison had been the sheriff for nearly 20 years and had developed a deep appreciation for the Amish families in his county. I suppose you've heard about the Bradley situation with that stallion. We were just discussing it, Samuel replied carefully. Well, I've got until tomorrow morning to find someone willing to take that horse, or I'm afraid we're going to have to put him down. Can't have an animal like that loose in the community. 3 people injured is 3 too many. Sheriff Morrison paused, studying Samuel's face. You wouldn't happen to know anyone fool enough to take on a project like that, would you? Jacob opened his mouth to speak, but Samuel's quiet voice cut through the morning air like a blade. I'll take him. The silence that followed was so complete that the only sound was the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of corn stalks in the breeze. Sheriff Morrison's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared under his thinning hairline. And Jacob felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. Samuel, with all due respect, have you lost your mind? Sheriff Morrison asked, his voice carrying the tone of a man who had just heard someone volunteer to wrestle a tornado. That horse put Tom Bradley in the hospital just last week. Before that, he nearly killed Jenny Murphy when she tried to groom him. This isn't a slightly difficult animal we're talking about. This is a genuinely dangerous horse that seems to attack without warning or reason. Samuel nodded slowly, as if he had expected exactly this reaction. I understand the concerns, Sheriff, but I also understand that tomorrow morning you're planning to end the life of an animal that might just need a different kind of approach. I'm not saying I can fix whatever's wrong with Thunder, but I am saying I'm willing to try. Jacob stepped forward, desperation creeping into his voice. David, think about this. What about Rebecca? What about little Sarah and Moses? He was referring to his own wife and children, who spent every day on the farm. What if something happens? What if Thunder hurts one of them? Thunder won't be anywhere near the house or the family areas. Samuel replied with the calm certainty that had always characterized his decision-making. I'll build a separate paddock on the far side of the property, away from everything and everyone. I'll work with him alone until I know it's safe. Sheriff Morrison shook his head slowly. Samuel, I've known you for 15 years, and I've never known you to make a reckless decision. But this feels different. What's really going on here? Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting back toward the pasture where their horses continued their peaceful morning routine. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made both men lean in to listen. 6 months ago, I lost my Sarah. Since then, I've been walking around this farm, feeling like half of myself is missing. The other day, when I saw Thunder standing in that cramped little paddock, I recognized something in his eyes that I see in my own mirror every morning. Sometimes, Sheriff, the most dangerous animals aren't angry. They're just broken-hearted and don't know how to tell anyone. The words hung in the air between them, and Jacob felt his chest tighten as he finally understood what was driving his father's seemingly impossible decision. This wasn't just about saving a horse. This was about Samuel trying to save something in himself. Sheriff Morrison studied Samuel's face for a long moment, then sighed deeply. Against my better judgment, and against every instinct I have as a law enforcement officer, I'm going to give you a chance. But Samuel, I need your word on the moment. And I mean the very moment. That horse shows any sign of aggression toward you or anyone else. You call me immediately. I won't have another person injured or worse on my watch. You have my word, Samuel replied solemnly. And I want Dr. Sarah Chen, the large animal veterinarian, to examine Thunder before you take possession. If she says he's physically sound, and there's no medical reason for the aggression, then we'll proceed. If there's something physically wrong that's causing him to lash out, We deal with it appropriately." Samuel nodded his agreement, though something in his expression suggested he already suspected Thunder's problems weren't physical. As Sheriff Morrison prepared to leave, he paused at his car door. "Samuel, I hope you know what you're doing. That horse has defeated every attempt to train or tame him. What makes you think you'll be different?" Samuel smiled for the first time that morning, and for just a moment, Jacob caught a glimpse of the father he remembered from before Sarah's illness had cast its shadow over their family. "Maybe I won't be different, Sheriff. Maybe that's exactly what Thunder needs." That afternoon, word spread through the Amish community with the speed that only small-town news can achieve. By evening, Samuel's phone was ringing constantly, an unusual occurrence in their simple household, as concerned friends and family members called to express everything from disbelief to outright horror at his decision. His daughter Mary, who lived 3 farms over, arrived just before sunset with her husband Daniel and their twin boys. At 28, Mary had inherited her mother's gentle strength, but also her stubborn streak, and Samuel could see both qualities warring in her expression as she marched up to the front porch where he sat watching the sunset. "Dad, please tell me this is all some kind of misunderstanding," she said, settling beside him on the wooden bench that Sarah had loved so much. "Please tell me you haven't actually agreed to bring that dangerous horse onto our family property." Samuel reached over and patted his daughter's hand, noting how much it resembled her mother's. "Mary, do you remember the story your mother used to tell about how we met?" Mary's expression softened slightly. "Of course I do. You were both 16, and there was that injured owl that everyone said was too hurt and too wild to save." "That's right. Your mother found that owl with a broken wing, nearly dead from starvation, and she insisted on nursing it back to health. Everyone told her it was hopeless, that the owl would never fly again, that it would just die anyway despite her efforts. But she saved it," Mary whispered, remembering the countless times Sarah had told the story. "And when it finally healed and flew away, you knew you wanted to marry her." "I knew I wanted to marry her the moment I saw her bandaging that owl's wing. Actually," Samuel corrected gently, "because I realized I was looking at someone who could see possibility where everyone else saw only problems. Someone who believed that broken things could be made whole again with enough patience and love." Mary felt tears prick her eyes. "Det, that's a beautiful story. But Mother isn't here anymore to help you if something goes wrong. What if Thunder really is as dangerous as everyone says? What if he hurts you?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Mary, since your mother passed, I felt like that injured owl myself, broken and grounded, with everyone wondering if I'll ever fly again. Maybe working with Thunder won't just help him. Maybe it will help me remember what it feels like to have hope again." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Bishop Eli Miller, whose presence on their porch after sunset indicated the seriousness of the situation. At 70, Bishop Miller commanded respect throughout their community, and his weathered face showed the concern that had prompted this unusual evening visit. "Samuel," the bishop said, settling into Sarah's rocking chair with the familiarity of an old friend, "I've been hearing troubling things about your plans for tomorrow." "I imagine you have," Samuel replied respectfully. "Help me understand, my friend. You've always been one of our most thoughtful and careful members. Your judgment has been sound over 40 years. What's changed?" Samuel considered the question carefully. "Bishop, do you remember what you told me at Sarah's funeral? You said that sometimes God puts the most difficult challenges in our path, not to punish us, but to reveal something about ourselves we didn't know was there." Bishop Miller nodded slowly. "I remember. I keep thinking about that, about what this might be meant to reveal. Maybe I'm supposed to learn something about faith, about trust, about seeing God's creatures with different eyes. Or maybe," Samuel's voice grew softer, "maybe I'm supposed to learn something about healing from brokenness." The porch fell silent except for the evening sounds of the farm, the gentle lowing of cattle, the rustle of horses in the pasture, the distant call of a whippoorwill. Finally, Bishop Miller spoke. "Samuel, I won't pretend to understand what you're feeling or what's driving this decision. But I will say this, our community will be praying for you and for that horse. And if you find yourself in over your head, you must promise to ask for help. I promise, Samuel said solemnly. As the bishop prepared to leave, he paused at the porch steps. Sarah always said you had a gift with animals. Maybe it's time to trust that gift, even when the rest of us are afraid. That night, Samuel lay awake in the bed he had shared with Sarah for nearly 4 decades, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Through the open window, he could hear the peaceful sounds of their own horses settling in for the night, and he tried to imagine what it would be like tomorrow when thunder arrived. Just before dawn, he made his way to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee, a habit Sarah had started years ago when their children were small and the days began early. As he sat at the kitchen table with his cup, he noticed Sarah's old Bible still sitting in its usual place. Almost without thinking, he opened it to a passage she had marked years ago. "He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds," he read aloud to the empty kitchen. Then, for the first time since Sarah's death, Samuel Stoltzfus smiled with something that felt like genuine hope. By 7 o'clock that morning, a small crowd had gathered at the entrance to the Stoltzfus farm. Word had spread beyond the Amish community, and several English neighbors had come to witness what many were calling either an act of incredible faith or dangerous foolishness. Sarah Chen's veterinary truck was already parked in the driveway, and Sheriff Morrison's patrol car sat nearby. Samuel walked out to meet them, dressed in his best work clothes and carrying the calm dignity that had always been his trademark. But those who knew him well could see something different in his bearing, a sense of purpose that had been missing since Sarah's death. "Morning, Samuel," Dr. Chen called out as she finished loading her equipment. "I've completed my examination of Thunder, and I have to say, the results are interesting." "What did you find?" Samuel asked, though something in the veterinarian's tone suggested she had discovered something unexpected. "Physically, Thunder is in perfect health. No injuries, no signs of illness or pain that would explain his aggressive behavior. But Samuel, I found something else." Dr. Chen paused, glancing around at the gathered crowd. "Could we speak privately for a moment?" Samuel nodded, and they walked a short distance from the others. Chen's expression was serious but puzzled. "Samuel, I've been working with horses for 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. Thunder's aggressive episodes seem to follow a pattern, but it's not what anyone expects. He's not randomly violent. His aggression appears to be triggered by specific situations involving restraint or confinement. More importantly, when he's not being handled or confined, he shows classic signs of severe depression and anxiety." "What are you saying, Doctor?" "I'm saying that horse isn't mean, Samuel. He's traumatized. Something happened to him that's left him terrified of being trapped or controlled. His violence isn't malicious, it's panic." Samuel felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in months. It was the feeling of pieces falling into place, of understanding dawning where confusion had reigned. "There's something else," Dr. Chen continued. "I did some research last night into Thunder's background. He wasn't always like this. 2 years ago, he was considered one of the gentlest horses in the county. The change in his behavior started after a barn fire at his original owner's property. Thunder was trapped in his stall for nearly 6 hours before they could get him out. He watched the barn burn around him, and 2 other horses didn't make it out." The revelation hit Samuel like a physical blow. Thunder wasn't an aggressive horse. He was a broken-hearted one, carrying trauma that no one had recognized or understood. "Doctor," Samuel said quietly, "how do you heal a traumatized horse?" "Patience, Samuel. Enormous amounts of patience, and maybe something else that can't be taught or learned from books. Maybe what that horse needs is someone who understands what it's like to lose everything you love." As Dr. Chen walked back toward the crowd, Samuel remained standing alone, staring across his pasture, but seeing something entirely different. For the first time since Sheriff Morrison had mentioned Thunder's situation, Samuel felt certain he was making the right choice. The transport trailer arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, and the tension in the gathered crowd was palpable. Even from inside the trailer, they could hear Thunder's distressed whinnying and the sound of his hooves against the metal walls. When the trailer door opened, several people instinctively stepped backward. Thunder emerged like a black storm cloud given form, massive, powerful, and radiating an energy that made everyone present acutely aware of their own vulnerability. But Samuel, watching from a safe distance, saw something the others missed. Thunder's eyes weren't filled with rage or malice. They were filled with terror. The process of getting Thunder from the trailer to his new paddock took nearly an hour and required the combined efforts of 3 experienced handlers with specialized equipment. Throughout the entire ordeal, Thunder fought against every attempt to guide or control him, his panic evident in every labored breath and wild movement. Finally, Thunder was released into the large paddock Samuel had prepared on the far side of the property. The moment the gate closed behind him, the horse ran to the farthest corner and stood with his back pressed against the fence, his sides heaving and his eyes never leaving the group of humans watching him. "There's your new project, Samuel," Sheriff Morrison said grimly. "God help you both." As the crowd dispersed and the various vehicles pulled away, Samuel found himself alone with Jacob, staring across the distance at the horse that was now his responsibility. Thunder had not moved from his corner, and his distress was visible even from hundreds of yards away. "Dat," Jacob said softly, "what do we do now?" Samuel adjusted his hat and smiled, and for the first time in months, Jacob heard something in his father's voice that sounded like the man he remembered from before grief had settled over their family like a heavy blanket. "Now, son, we give Thunder the one thing no one else has been able to give him." "What's that?" "Time." Samuel's first week with Thunder established a routine that would have seemed strange to anyone watching from a distance. Each morning at dawn, he would walk to the paddock carrying a simple wooden chair, which he would place approximately 50 feet from where Thunder stood pressed against the far fence. Then Samuel would sit, sometimes for hours, doing nothing more than existing in the same space as the traumatized horse. Thunder's initial response was pure terror. The massive stallion would pace frantically along the back fence line, his nostrils flaring and his eyes rolling white with panic. Every few minutes he would rear up on his hind legs, striking at the air as if fighting invisible demons. The sound of his distressed whinnying carried across the farm, causing their other horses to shift nervously in their own pastures. "This is heartbreaking to watch," Rebecca whispered to Jacob on the third morning, as they observed Samuel's patient vigil from the kitchen window. She was a gentle woman of 31, with the kind of nurturing spirit that made her a natural mother to their 2 young children and a perfect daughter-in-law to Samuel. "That poor animal is suffering so much," Jacob nodded, his own heart heavy, as he watched his father sit motionless in his chair, while Thunder continued his frantic pacing. "I keep waiting for Dat to give up, to admit this was a mistake. But look at him. He seems more focused than he's been since Mam died." What Jacob couldn't see from the house was the subtle changes happening in the paddock. By the 4th day, Thunder's pacing had developed a pattern. Instead of random panic, he was moving in deliberate circles, always keeping Samuel in sight, but no longer striking at the air. His whinnying had changed too, from sharp cries of terror to something that sounded almost like questions. Samuel noticed everything. He observed that Thunder was calmer in the early morning hours, more agitated when the wind picked up, and most distressed when any kind of vehicle approached the farm. He began to understand that Thunder wasn't reacting to his presence specifically. He was reacting to the possibility of being trapped, controlled, or forced into confinement. On the 5th morning, Samuel made a small but significant change to his routine. Instead of carrying just his chair, he brought along Sarah's old knitting basket, filled with wool that needed to be sorted for Rebecca's winter projects. As he settled into his familiar spot, he began the quiet, methodical work of organizing the skeins by color and weight. The effect on Thunder was remarkable. The horse's frantic energy seemed to slow as he watched Samuel's gentle, rhythmic movements. For the first time since his arrival, Thunder stood completely still for more than a few seconds, his ears pricked forward with what appeared to be curiosity rather than fear. "That's it, isn't it?" Samuel murmured to himself, understanding flooding through him. "You need to see that I'm not here to control you or trap you. You need to know that I have my own purpose, my own work, and I'm not focused entirely on you." From that day forward, Samuel always brought some kind of quiet work to the paddock. Sometimes it was mending harnesses, sometimes sharpening tools, occasionally reading from one of Sarah's favorite books. The key was that his attention was divided, giving Thunder space to observe without feeling like the focus of unwanted scrutiny. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday morning in late October. Samuel had been sitting in his usual spot for about an hour, repairing a bridle, while thunder rumbled overhead. A sound that initially sent Thunder into a panic, before he seemed to realize it was coming from the sky, not from some hidden threat. When Samuel looked up from his work, he found Thunder standing only 30 feet away, still alert and ready to flee, but closer than he had ever voluntarily come. "Hello, Thunder," Samuel said softly, not looking directly at the horse, but acknowledging his presence. "That's quite a storm rolling in, isn't it?" Thunder's ears twitched at the sound of Samuel's voice, but he didn't retreat. For 10 precious minutes, they shared the space in relative calm, Samuel working on his bridle, while Thunder simply stood and watched. When the rain began to fall harder, Thunder finally moved away, but he walked rather than ran, and he looked back over his shoulder twice. That evening at dinner, Samuel shared the news with his family, and for the first time since Sarah's death, there was genuine excitement in his voice. "We came closer today," Samuel announced, passing the bowl of green beans to little Sarah, his 7-year-old granddaughter, who had inherited her grandmother's name and gentle spirit. Thunder stood close enough that I could see the details of his markings clearly. "Was he still afraid, Gross Dordie?" little Sarah asked, using the Pennsylvania Dutch word for grandfather that always made Samuel's heart warm. "Yes, child, he was still afraid, but he was also curious. And curiosity is the beginning of trust." Moses, who at 5 years old was full of questions about everything, piped up from his seat. "When will Thunder let you pet him like our other horses?" Samuel considered the question seriously. "I don't know, Moses. Maybe never. Thunder has been hurt in ways that our other horses haven't. He might always need more space, more time, more patience than other animals. But that doesn't mean he's broken beyond repair. It just means he's different." Rebecca caught Jacob's eye across the table, both of them recognizing the deeper meaning in Samuel's words. He wasn't just talking about Thunder anymore. The second breakthrough came 2 weeks later, during an Indian summer day that had brought unseasonably warm weather to Lancaster County. Samuel was in the paddock, as usual, this time working on a wooden toy horse he was carving for Moses's upcoming birthday. The repetitive motion of the carving knife and the gentle scraping sounds seemed to fascinate Thunder, who had begun a new behavior of moving closer during Samuel's visits, then retreating when he felt he had been too bold. On this particular day, Thunder approached to within 15 feet, closer than ever before, and then did something that made Samuel's breath catch in his throat. The horse lowered his massive head and began to graze, a sign of trust and relaxation that Samuel had been hoping to see for weeks. "Well, look at that," Samuel murmured, continuing his carving without looking up. "You're finally starting to believe that this is your space, aren't you?" For the first time, Thunder didn't startle at the sound of Samuel's voice. Instead, he lifted his head and looked directly at the man who had spent so many patient hours simply existing in his presence. Their eyes met across the distance, and Samuel felt something pass between them. Not quite trust, not yet, but the possibility of trust. The moment was shattered by the unexpected arrival of a delivery truck, its diesel engine rumbling loudly as it approached the main house. Thunder's transformation was instantaneous and heartbreaking. The calm, grazing horse disappeared, replaced by the terrified animal who had first arrived at the farm. Thunder bolted to his corner, his sides heaving and his eyes wild with panic. But this time something was different. Instead of pressing himself against the back fence and staying there for hours, Thunder kept glancing towards Samuel, as if looking for reassurance or guidance. It was a small change, but Samuel recognized it as monumentally significant. "It's all right, Thunder," Samuel said calmly, setting down his carving and remaining in his chair. "It's just a truck. It can't hurt you, and it's not here for you. You're safe." Thunder's ears flicked towards Samuel's voice, and although he didn't move from his corner, his breathing began to slow. For the next 20 minutes, Samuel continued talking in low, soothing tones, describing the farm, the weather, the plans for winter preparations, anything to maintain a calm, steady presence while Thunder worked through his panic. When the truck finally left and Thunder's breathing returned to normal, Samuel made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of staying in his chair, he stood up slowly and walked to the fence that separated him from Thunder's paddock. Not the gate. He was careful not to approach any kind of opening or entrance, but simply to the fence itself. Thunder watched his approach with intense focus but didn't retreat further. Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out an apple he had brought from their orchard, placing it on top of the fence post before stepping back to his usual position. "That's for you," Samuel said simply, "for being brave today, even when you were scared." Thunder stared at the apple for nearly an hour after Samuel left that evening. When Jacob checked on him before bed, the apple was gone. The pattern of small gifts continued over the following weeks. Sometimes it was an apple, sometimes a handful of oats, occasionally a few sugar cubes that Samuel remembered Sarah using to reward their horses for good behavior. Thunder never took the treats while Samuel was present, but they were always gone by evening. And gradually, the horse began to show signs of anticipation when Samuel approached the fence. November brought the first hard frost, and with it, new challenges. Thunder's paddock shelter was well built and weatherproof, but the horse refused to use it, preferring to stand in the open even during rain and snow. Samuel realized that any kind of enclosed space triggered Thunder's trauma, making the shelter feel like a trap rather than protection. "He's going to freeze out there," Mary worried during one of her evening visits. "Nat, you can't let that horse suffer through winter without proper shelters." Samuel had been thinking about the same problem, and that evening he began work on a solution that demonstrated the depths of his understanding of Thunder's psychological needs. Instead of trying to force or coax Thunder into the existing shelter, Samuel began building something entirely different. Working by lantern light after his regular farm duties were complete, Samuel constructed what he called a three-sided haven. It was open on one side, providing Thunder with multiple escape routes, and positioned so that the horse could see the entire paddock and beyond while using it. The design eliminated any sense of being trapped while still providing protection from the elements. The construction took 2 weeks, and Thunder watched every step of the process with intense interest. When Samuel finally completed the structure, he didn't try to encourage Thunder to use it. Instead, he simply made it available and trusted the horse's intelligence and survival instincts. Thunder investigated the new shelter for 3 days, approaching and retreating, walking around it, even tentatively stepping partially inside before backing out again. On the 4th night, when a November blizzard brought the season's first heavy snow, Jacob found Thunder standing inside the shelter, warm and dry but positioned so he could bolt at the first sign of danger. "He's learning to trust again," Samuel told Rebecca the next morning, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Not trust in people necessarily, but trust in his own ability to stay safe while accepting help. Rebecca studied her father-in-law's face, noting the changes that had developed over the past weeks. Samuel's shoulders no longer carried the defeated slump that had characterized his posture since Sarah's death. His eyes held focus and purpose, and he spoke about the future, Thunder's future, with a hope that had been absent from his voice for months. "Samuel," Rebecca said gently, "I think Thunder isn't the only one who's learning to trust again." The comment stopped Samuel short, and he looked at Rebecca with surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean that 6 weeks ago, you were a man who had given up on tomorrow. You went through the motions of living, but there was no joy in it, no hope. Now you get up each morning with purpose. You talk about plans and possibilities. You're healing too, aren't you? Samuel considered her words as he prepared for his morning visit to Thunder's paddock. The observation was more accurate than he had realized. Working with Thunder had given him a reason to believe in gradual progress, in the possibility that broken things could slowly become whole again. In helping Thunder learn to trust, Samuel had begun to trust as well. Trust that life could still hold meaning, that tomorrow could be better than today, that love didn't end when loss arrived. December brought a cold snap that tested both Samuel's dedication and Thunder's progress. The morning routine continued regardless of weather, with Samuel bundling up in Sarah's old wool coat and making his way to the paddock, even when the temperature dropped below zero. On one particularly bitter morning, Samuel arrived to find Thunder standing as close to the fence as he had ever come, only about 8 feet separating them. The horse's breath formed clouds in the frigid air, and his usual alertness was tempered by what appeared to be genuine pleasure at Samuel's arrival. "Cold morning, isn't it, friend?" Samuel said, settling into his chair with a thermos of hot coffee. Rebecca had prepared. "I brought some extra oats today. Figured you could use the extra calories to stay warm." Instead of placing the oats on the fence post as usual, Samuel made a decision that represented weeks of careful observation and growing understanding. He walked directly to the gate, not to open it, but to place the oats in a bucket that hung on the outside of the gate where Thunder could reach it. Thunder watched this change in routine with intense focus, his body tense and ready for flight. But when Samuel returned to his chair without attempting to enter the paddock, Thunder's curiosity overcame his fear. For the first time since his arrival, Thunder approached the gate area while Samuel was present. The significance of the moment wasn't lost on Samuel. Gates represented the ultimate symbol of control and confinement to Thunder. Yet here he was, voluntarily approaching one, because his trust in Samuel had grown strong enough to overcome his deepest fear. Thunder ate the oats while Samuel watched, and when he finished, instead of retreating to his usual safe distance, the horse remained near the gate. For 20 minutes they stayed in this new configuration. Samuel in his chair, Thunder standing close enough that they could see each other's eyes clearly, the gate standing between them, not as a barrier, but as a boundary that both respected. "You know, Thunder," Samuel said softly, "I think you're ready for the next step in your healing. Not because I think you should be, but because you're showing me that you might be ready to try." That afternoon, Samuel made a phone call that surprised his entire family. He called Dr. Sarah Chen and asked her to return to the farm, not for an emergency, but for what he called a consultation about possibilities. Chen arrived the following morning, and Samuel walked her to the paddock, where Thunder stood in his 3-sided shelter, watching their approach with alert interest rather than panic. "My goodness," Dr. Chen breathed, observing Thunder's calm demeanor and healthy appearance. "Samuel, this is remarkable. He's gained weight, his coat is glossy, and look at his posture. That's not a traumatized horse anymore. That's a horse who feels secure." "He's come a long way," Samuel agreed, "but I think he's ready to come further, if we're careful about how we approach it." Chen studied Thunder for several minutes, noting the horse's obvious comfort with Samuel's presence and his willingness to remain visible rather than hiding in the back corner of the paddock. "What did you have in mind?" she asked. Samuel's answer revealed the depth of thought he had put into Thunder's continued healing. "I want to try to halter train him again. Not the traditional way, not with force or confinement, but with choice. I want to teach him that wearing a halter doesn't mean he's trapped, and that human touch doesn't have to be something to fear." Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose. "Samuel, that's ambitious. Halter training a traumatized horse requires enormous patience and skill." "I have patience," Samuel replied simply, "and Thunder has been teaching me what I need to know about skill." The halter training began the following week with what Samuel called the introduction of possibilities. Instead of bringing a halter into the paddock, Samuel simply brought one to his morning visits and left it visible on his chair, while he worked on other tasks. Thunder's reaction was immediate and intense. The mere sight of the halter triggered memories that sent him retreating to his corner. But Samuel had expected this response. "It's all right, Thunder," he said calmly, not looking at the horse directly. "That halter isn't going anywhere near you until you decide you want it to. Right now, it's just an object, like my chair or my tools. Nothing more." For 2 weeks, the halter simply existed in Thunder's environment without any attempt to use it. Gradually, Thunder's fear of the object diminished as he realized it posed no immediate threat. He began to investigate it from a distance, sometimes approaching Samuel's chair when the halter was present, learning that its presence didn't necessarily mean danger. The next step was what Samuel called voluntary association. He began placing treats near the halter, allowing Thunder to make the choice between avoiding the object or accepting its presence in exchange for food. Thunder's intelligence and growing trust led him to choose the treats, creating positive associations with the previously terrifying object. Christmas Eve brought an unexpected gift. Samuel had spent the morning in Thunder's paddock, as usual, the halter present but not intrusive, when Thunder did something that took Samuel's breath away. The horse approached the chair where Samuel sat, extended his neck, and gently sniffed the halter. It was the first time Thunder had voluntarily touched any piece of equipment, and the significance of the moment brought tears to Samuel's eyes. This wasn't just a horse overcoming his fear of a halter. This was a traumatized creature, choosing trust over terror, hope over despair. "Merry Christmas, Thunder," Samuel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "That's the best present I could have asked for." That evening, the extended Stoltzfus family gathered for their traditional Christmas Eve dinner, the house filled with the sounds of children's laughter, adult conversation, and the gentle clatter of dishes, as Rebecca and Mary served the meal that Sarah had always prepared. "Tell us about Thunder's progress, Dad," Mary requested as they settled around the table. "Jacob says he's like a different horse." Samuel's face lit up as he described Thunder's journey from terrified animal to trusting companion. His family listened with growing amazement as he detailed the small victories, the setbacks, and the gradual building of trust that had defined the past 3 months. "But the most remarkable thing," Samuel concluded, "is that Thunder has been healing me as much as I've been helping him. Every day I watch him choose trust over fear. I remember that I can make the same choice." Little Sarah, who had been listening intently, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "Gross Dawdy, do you think Thunder will ever be a normal horse again?" Samuel considered the question carefully. "I don't think Thunder will ever be exactly like other horses, Sarah. His experiences changed him in ways that can't be completely undone. But I don't think that's the goal anymore. The goal is for Thunder to be the best version of himself that he can be, carrying his experiences but not being controlled by them." Bishop Miller, who had been invited to join the family celebration, nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like wisdom that applies to more than just horses, Samuel." "Yes," Samuel agreed, his voice soft with understanding. "I think it does." As the family continued their celebration, Samuel found his thoughts drifting to the paddock, where Thunder stood in his shelter, safe and warm, and no longer alone with his fears. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new possibilities, but tonight, both man and horse had reason to hope. January arrived with a blizzard that tested the limits of both Thunder's progress and Samuel's dedication. The storm lasted 3 days, with snow accumulating so heavily that the regular farm routines became impossible. But on the morning the storm finally broke, Samuel bundled himself against the cold and made his way through waist-deep snow to check on Thunder. What he found stopped him in his tracks. Thunder was standing at the gate of his paddock, nickering softly, the first vocal greeting he had ever offered. The horse had clearly been watching for Samuel's arrival, and his obvious relief and pleasure at seeing his human companion brought tears to Samuel's eyes. "You were worried about me, weren't you?" Samuel said, approaching the gate with wonder in his voice. "You thought maybe I wasn't coming back." Thunder's response was to press his nose against the gate, as close to Samuel as the barrier would allow. For the first time since his arrival at the farm, Thunder was actively seeking human contact, rather than merely tolerating it. That afternoon, Samuel made a decision that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. With Dr. Chen present as a precaution, Samuel entered Thunder's paddock for the first time. Thunder's initial reaction was predictable. He retreated to his shelter and watched Samuel's approach with tense alertness. But Samuel didn't pursue him or try to force any interaction. Instead, he simply sat down in the middle of the paddock, in the snow, and waited. "I'm not here to trap you or control you," Samuel said calmly. "I'm here because I think you might be ready to have me in your space, the same way you've been in mine all these months." For 2 hours, Samuel sat in the snow while Thunder worked through his conflicted feelings about this new situation. Gradually, curiosity overcame fear, and Thunder began to investigate this strange human who was willing to sit in his environment without making any demands. By the end of the session, Thunder was grazing peacefully while Samuel remained seated nearby, not close enough to touch, but close enough that they shared the same immediate space for the first time. "That was remarkable," Dr. Chen told Samuel as they left the paddock. "I've never seen anything like it. Thunder didn't just tolerate your presence. He eventually welcomed it." February brought the opportunity Samuel had been waiting for, the chance to begin actual halter training. But his approach was unlike anything Dr. Chen had ever witnessed. Instead of putting the halter on Thunder, Samuel began by teaching Thunder to put the halter on himself. Using a technique he had developed through careful observation of Thunder's learning patterns, Samuel hung the halter at Thunder's head level and placed treats inside the noseband. Thunder's intelligence and growing trust allowed him to understand that inserting his nose into the halter brought rewards without restriction of movement. Day by day, Thunder became comfortable with the sensation of the halter around his nose. Samuel never fastened it or used it to control Thunder's movement. Instead, he allowed Thunder to wear it for increasingly longer periods, while remaining completely free to move as he chose. The breakthrough came on a sunny February morning, when Thunder, wearing the loose halter, walked directly up to Samuel and stood quietly while Samuel gently fastened it for the first time. The moment represented not just successful training, but the complete transformation of a relationship built on mutual trust and respect. "You're telling me you're ready," Samuel said softly, his hands gentle as he adjusted the halter. "You're telling me you'll trust me enough to give up that last bit of control, because you know I'll never use it against you." Thunder's response was to lower his head and rest it against Samuel's shoulder, the first voluntary physical affection he had ever offered to a human being. March brought visitors from across Lancaster County as word spread about Samuel's success with Thunder. Horse trainers, veterinarians, and fellow farmers came to witness the transformation of the horse that had once been considered hopelessly dangerous. But the most meaningful visitor was Tom Bradley, Thunder's previous owner, who arrived on a cloudy March afternoon with his arm still in a sling from his encounter with Thunder months earlier. "I had to see it for myself," Tom admitted, watching in amazement as Thunder grazed peacefully in Samuel's presence. "That's not the same horse that nearly killed me. What did you do to him?" Samuel's answer revealed the wisdom he had gained through months of patient work. "I didn't do anything to him, Tom. I gave him the chance to heal from what had been done to him before. Thunder wasn't a bad horse, he was a broken horse. All he needed was time, space, and someone willing to meet him where he was instead of demanding that he be where they thought he should be." Tom studied Thunder's calm demeanor and healthy appearance, then looked at Samuel with newfound respect. "I owe you an apology, Samuel. I thought you were crazy for taking on an animal like Thunder. I see now that maybe Thunder wasn't the one who needed fixing." The comment stayed with Samuel as spring arrived and brought new energy to the farm. Thunder's transformation was complete in many ways, but Samuel realized that the horse's healing had been merely one part of a larger story. The months of patient work, of choosing hope over despair, of believing in the possibility of healing, had restored something in Samuel that he had thought was lost forever. April brought the final test of Thunder's progress when Doc Chan suggested that Thunder might be ready for light riding, not as a working horse, but as a companion animal who could safely carry a trusted human. Samuel's first ride on Thunder was unlike anything he had experienced in 40 years of working with horses. Thunder's step was careful and measured, his attention constantly focused on Samuel's comfort and safety. This wasn't submission born of fear, but partnership born of mutual respect and affection. As they walked slowly around the paddock, Samuel felt Sarah's presence more strongly than he had since her death. He could almost hear her voice saying what she always said when witnessing acts of healing. Love is the only force strong enough to transform brokenness into beauty. That evening, as Samuel brushed Thunder's coat in the gentle light of the setting sun, he reflected on the journey they had traveled together. Thunder had taught him that healing wasn't about returning to what had been before, but about creating something new from the pieces that remained. The horse would always carry the scars of his trauma, just as Samuel would always carry the grief of losing Sarah, but neither of them had to be defined by their wounds. "Thank you, Thunder," Samuel whispered into the horse's neck, "for teaching an old man that it's never too late to choose trust over fear, hope over despair, love over loss." Thunder's response was to turn his great head and gently nuzzle Samuel's cheek, a gesture of affection that spoke louder than any words could have. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Samuel led Thunder back to his shelter, not because the horse needed to be confined, but because Thunder now chose the shelter as his resting place, secure in the knowledge that morning would bring Samuel's return and another day of the partnership they had built together. The transformation was complete, but the story was far from over. Samuel and Thunder had found in each other the healing they both needed, proving that sometimes the most broken things in this world just need someone willing to see past the brokenness to the beauty that lies beneath. 6 months had passed since that autumn morning, when Samuel first decided to adopt the most aggressive horse in town. What happened in those months had indeed shocked everyone, not because of violence or tragedy, but because of the quiet miracle of two broken hearts learning to trust again, heal together, and find in each other the hope they both thought they had lost forever. The end had become a new beginning, just as Sarah always said it would be. The spring of Samuel's 63rd year brought changes to the Stoltzfus farm that no one could have anticipated. Thunder's transformation had become legendary throughout Lancaster County, but what surprised Samuel most was how the horse's healing had awakened something in him that he thought had died with Sarah. For the first time since his wife's passing, Samuel found himself thinking about the future with genuine anticipation rather than resigned acceptance. It was on a warm May morning, as Samuel groomed Thunder in the early sunlight, that an unexpected visitor arrived at the farm. Dr. Michael Harrison, a psychiatrist from Philadelphia who specialized in trauma therapy, had driven out specifically to meet Samuel and observe his work with Thunder. "Mr. Stoltzfus," Harrison said, introducing himself with the respectful formality that outsiders typically used when visiting Amish families, "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I've been hearing remarkable things about your success with Thunder, and I was hoping to learn from your methods." Samuel paused in his brushing and studied the well-dressed wren with curious eyes. "I'm not sure what I could teach you, Doctor. I'm just a farmer who happened to have time to spend with a horse that needed patience." Harrison watched Thunder's calm response to Samuel's presence, noting the obvious bond between man and horse. "Mr. Stoltzfus, what you've accomplished here's far beyond simple horse training. You've essentially provided trauma therapy to an animal that every expert said was beyond help. The techniques you've developed could revolutionize how we approach healing in both animals and humans." The conversation that followed opened Samuel's eyes to the broader implications of his work with Thunder. Harrison explained that traditional trauma therapy often failed because it tried to force healing on a predetermined timeline, much like the conventional horse training that had failed with Thunder. "Your approach," Harrison continued, "of meeting Thunder where he was, of allowing him to set the pace of his own healing, of building trust without demands, these are principles that could transform human therapy as well." Samuel found himself thinking about Dr. Harrison's words throughout the following weeks. The idea that his simple, patient approach with Thunder might have applications beyond their farm both intrigued and overwhelmed him, but it also sparked a new sense of purpose that went beyond his own healing. The opportunity to explore this purpose came sooner than expected. Word of Thunder's transformation had reached the state's Agricultural Extension Office, and in early June, Samuel received a formal invitation to speak at the Regional Horse Breeders Association's annual conference. "They want me to talk about Thunder," Samuel asked Jacob, holding the official letter with bewilderment. "What would I say to a room full of professional horse trainers?" Jacob smiled, recognizing the same humility that had always characterized his father. "Dad, you took a horse that 3 professionals couldn't help and turned him into the gentlest animal on our farm. I think they might want to know how you did it." The decision to accept the speaking invitation wasn't easy for Samuel. Public speaking went against every instinct of his quiet, humble nature, but when he thought about other horses like Thunder, animals written off as hopeless, dangerous, or broken beyond repair, he felt a responsibility to share what he had learned. The conference was held at the Lancaster County Convention Center, and Samuel had never felt more out of place in his life. Surrounded by professionals in expensive suits and cowboy boots, wearing his simple black coat and felt hat, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. But when Dr. Sarah Chen introduced him to the packed auditorium, describing Thunder's journey from dangerous outcast to beloved companion, Samuel felt Sarah's presence beside him, giving him the courage to speak his truth. "I want to start by saying that I'm not a professional trainer," Samuel began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I'm just a farmer who happened to have something that Thunder needed more than techniques or equipment. I had time." For the next hour, Samuel told Thunder's story, with the same gentle honesty that had characterized his approach to the horse's healing. He spoke about patience, about meeting animals where they are rather than where we think they should be, about the difference between submission and trust, and about the healing power of unconditional acceptance. The audience, initially skeptical about learning from an Amish farmer with no formal training, found themselves captivated by Samuel's wisdom and the obvious results of his methods. When he finished speaking, the standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, but the most meaningful response came from Maria Santos, a young horse trainer from California, who approached Samuel after his presentation with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Stoltzfus," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I have a horse back home that everyone says should be put down. He's been through 3 different trainers, and we're out of options. After hearing your story, I think maybe we've been approaching his healing all wrong. Would you be willing to help me understand how to apply your methods?" Samuel's answer would change the trajectory of his remaining years. "I'd be honored to help, miss. But first, tell me about your horse. What happened to him that made him so afraid?" Maria's story was heartbreakingly similar to Thunder's. A beautiful Andalusian named Diego had been trapped in a stable fire as a young horse, watching other animals die while being unable to escape. Like Thunder, his subsequent aggressive behavior was actually trauma-driven panic. But no one had recognized the difference. "If you're willing to learn," Samuel told Maria, "I'll teach you what Thunder taught me. But you have to understand, this isn't about training techniques. It's about becoming the kind of person an animal can trust with their deepest fear." That conversation sparked what would become known as the Stoltzfus method, though Samuel always insisted it should be called the Thunder method, since the horse had been the real teacher. Over the following months, Samuel began consulting with horse owners across the country who had animals deemed hopeless or dangerous. The work was conducted entirely by phone and correspondence, as Samuel had no desire to travel extensively or leave his farm for extended periods. But his guidance, rooted in the patient wisdom he had learned from Thunder, began producing remarkable results across the country. Each success story strengthened Samuel's conviction that he had found his new purpose in life. He wasn't just helping horses heal from trauma, he was helping people understand that healing couldn't be forced, only invited, and that the greatest gift one could offer a wounded soul was the safety to heal at their own pace. Summer brought a new challenge that would test everything Samuel had learned about patience and faith. Thunder, now completely trusting and gentle, began showing signs of a subtle lameness that concerned Dr. Chen during a routine examination. "It's not severe," Chen explained after a thorough examination, "but there's definitely some arthritis developing in his left front leg. It's probably related to old injuries from his trauma period. All that panicked movement and impact likely caused some joint damage that's only now becoming apparent." The diagnosis hit Samuel harder than he expected. After everything Thunder had overcome, the idea that his past trauma was still causing him pain felt deeply unfair. But Samuel's response demonstrated how much his own healing had progressed over the past year. Instead of despair, Samuel felt determination. If Thunder needed special care and accommodation for the rest of his life, then that's what he would receive. Samuel immediately began researching equine arthritis management, consulting with veterinary specialists, and modifying Thunder's environment to minimize stress on his joints. The process brought them even closer together. Thunder seemed to understand that Samuel was helping him manage his discomfort, and his trust deepened into something that could only be described as devotion. On difficult days when the arthritis flared, Thunder would seek out Samuel's presence, finding comfort in the gentle hands that had first taught him to trust again. "You know what I think?" Rebecca observed one evening as she watched Samuel apply therapeutic liniment to Thunder's leg, while the horse stood perfectly still, eyes half closed with contentment. "I think Thunder's arthritis might be a blessing in disguise." Samuel looked up from his work with surprise. "How could pain be a blessing? Because it's given you both another way to take care of each other. Thunder gets to experience being cared for when he's vulnerable, and you get to show him that your love doesn't disappear when things get difficult. That's not something most horses ever learn about humans." Rebecca's observation proved prophetic. As summer progressed into fall, Thunder's arthritis became a bridge to even deeper trust. The horse learned to communicate his discomfort to Samuel, and Samuel learned to read Thunder's needs with an intuition that amazed everyone who witnessed it. The relationship had evolved beyond anything Samuel had imagined possible. Thunder wasn't just a healed horse. He had become Samuel's partner in a mission to help other wounded animals find their way back to trust. When Samuel worked with new cases by phone, Thunder often stood nearby, as if understanding that their story was helping others find hope. October brought an invitation that would test Samuel's comfort zone in entirely new ways. The University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine invited him to speak at their annual symposium on animal behavior and welfare. The invitation came with an unusual request. They wanted Samuel to bring Thunder and demonstrate their bond in person. "I don't know if Thunder would be comfortable in that environment," Samuel confided to Dr. Chen. "He's made so much progress, but being around crowds of strangers in an unfamiliar place." Dr. Chen understood Samuel's concerns, but had a suggestion that surprised him. "What if we frame it differently? What if this isn't about putting Thunder on display, but about giving him the opportunity to help other animals by showing people what healing looks like?" The reframing changed everything for Samuel. This wasn't about showcasing Thunder's obedience or his transformation for entertainment. This was about Thunder choosing to be vulnerable in service of other animals who needed advocates and understanding. When Samuel presented the opportunity to Thunder, literally talking to the horse about the decision, as had become his habit, Thunder's response was unmistakable. The horse pressed his head against Samuel's chest and nickered softly, the sound he had come to associate with agreement and trust. The trip to the university was Thunder's first time leaving the farm since his arrival over a year earlier. Samuel's heart pounded as they loaded Thunder into the specially designed trailer, watching for any signs of the old panic. But Thunder entered the trailer calmly, his trust in Samuel overriding his instinctive fear of confinement. The demonstration at the university was unlike anything the veterinary students had ever witnessed. In a large indoor arena, with nearly 200 people watching, Samuel and Thunder showed what true partnership between human and horse looked like. There were no ropes, no halters, no equipment of any kind. Samuel simply walked into the arena, and Thunder followed, staying close not from training or coercion, but from choice. When Samuel sat down in the center of the arena, Thunder lay down beside him, something the horse had never done before, even at home. This, Samuel said to the hushed audience, is what healing looks like. Not the absence of trauma, not the erasure of painful memories, but the choice to trust again despite those memories. Thunder will always carry the scars of what happened to him, but he's learned that his scars don't have to define his future. The presentation was interrupted by something unexpected. A young veterinary student in the front row began to cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that echoed through the arena. Samuel's response demonstrated the wisdom he had gained from his year with Thunder. Instead of continuing his presentation, he stopped talking and simply sat quietly, allowing the student's emotion to exist without trying to fix it or hurry it along. After several minutes, the young woman raised her hand. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "It's just that I've been watching what you and Thunder have together, and I realized I've never seen an animal that felt that safe with a human before. I've been studying veterinary medicine for 3 years, and I thought I understood animal behavior, but I've never seen trust like that." Samuel's response would be quoted in veterinary journals for years to come. "The most important thing Thunder taught me is that trust can't be earned through expertise or technique. It can only be earned through consistency, patience, and the willingness to let another being set the pace of their own healing. That's true whether you're working with horses or people or anyone who's been hurt by life." The return trip to the farm was triumphant. Thunder had not only tolerated the unfamiliar environment, but had seemed to understand his role in helping others learn. His calm confidence throughout the day showed how completely he had healed from his original trauma. But the real victory came that evening, as Samuel groomed Thunder in their familiar routine. The horse, tired from the day's unusual activities, rested his head on Samuel's shoulder and closed his eyes, a gesture of complete trust and contentment that spoke volumes about how far they had both traveled from their broken beginnings. November brought news that would test Samuel's newfound sense of purpose in unexpected ways. Maria Santos, the young trainer from California who had first approached him after his conference presentation, called with an update that left Samuel speechless. "Miss Stoltzfus," Maria said, her voice bubbling with excitement, "I have to tell you what happened with Diego. Using your methods, your patience, your approach, he's completely transformed. But that's not the amazing part. The amazing part is that we now have 12 other horses here that people brought us because they heard about Diego's recovery. They're calling our facility the Last Chance Ranch because we're taking horses that everyone else has given up on." Samuel listened with growing amazement as Maria described how the principles he had learned from Thunder were being applied to help horses across the country. Each success story strengthened his conviction that this work was more than a personal healing journey. It was a call. "There's something else," Maria continued. "The state of California has asked us to develop a formal program for rehabilitating traumatized horses. They want to use your methods as the foundation for a new approach to equine therapy. Ms. Stoltzfus, what you learned from Thunder is changing how we think about animal healing everywhere." The conversation left Samuel feeling both humbled and overwhelmed. He had simply tried to help one broken horse heal from trauma, and somehow that effort had grown into something much larger than he had ever imagined. That evening, as he shared the news with his family, Samuel reflected on the unexpected path his life had taken since Sarah's death. Grief had nearly broken him, but choosing to help Thunder heal had restored his sense of purpose and revealed gifts he hadn't known he possessed. "Dad," Mary said, studying her father's face in the lamplight, "you look different than you did a year ago. Happier, but also, I don't know how to describe it, more yourself, maybe." Samuel considered his daughter's observation. "I think Thunder taught me that healing doesn't mean going back to who you were before you got hurt. It means becoming who you're supposed to be because of what you've learned from the hurt." December brought the first anniversary of Samuel's decision to adopt Thunder, and the community planned a celebration that touched Samuel's heart. The entire extended family gathered, along with neighbors, friends, and even some of the professionals who had initially thought Samuel was making a terrible mistake. Sheriff Morrison, now one of Thunder's biggest admirers, stood up during the evening meal to offer a toast. A year ago, I thought Samuel Stoltzfus was the most foolish man in Lancaster County for taking on that dangerous horse. Tonight, I think he might be the wisest. Samuel, you didn't just save Thunder's life. You showed all of us what real healing looks like. But the most meaningful moment of the celebration came when little Sarah, now 8 years old, approached her grandfather with a carefully wrapped present. "Gross Dawdy," she said solemnly, "I made this for Thunder, but Mam says I should give it to you to give to him." Samuel unwrapped the gift to find a hand-knitted halter, made from soft wool in colors of brown and gold. The workmanship was imperfect, clearly the work of a child's hands, but the love woven into every stitch was unmistakable. "Sarah, this is beautiful," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thunder will treasure this. I made it special colors." Little Sarah explained proudly. "Brown like Thunder's eyes, and gold like the sunshine that makes him feel safe." The next morning, Samuel presented the halter to Thunder with the same ceremony he might have used for a graduation or wedding. Thunder stood perfectly still as Samuel fitted the soft wool halter, then turned to nuzzle the man who had become his salvation. "You know, Thunder," Samuel said softly, adjusting the halter with gentle hands, "a year ago, we were both broken in ways that seemed impossible to fix. Now look at us. We're not the same as we were before we got hurt, but we're whole again in a different way." Thunder's response was to rest his forehead against Samuel's chest, a gesture that had become their private language of love and trust. As the winter deepened and Samuel approached his second Christmas since Sarah's death, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this place of peace and purpose. The grief of losing Sarah would always be part of him, just as Thunder's trauma would always be part of his story. But both of them had learned that brokenness didn't have to be the end of their stories. It could be the beginning of something beautiful and unexpected. The last entry in Samuel's journal that year captured the wisdom he had gained from his unlikely teacher. "Thunder has taught me that healing is not about forgetting the past or pretending it didn't happen. Healing is about integrating our wounds into a new understanding of who we are and what we're capable of becoming. Some days the arthritis makes Thunder move more slowly, and some days my grief for Sarah makes my heart feel heavy. But those difficulties don't diminish our joy. They make it more precious because we understand how fragile and valuable it is." On New Year's Eve, as snow fell gently outside their warm barn, Samuel stood with Thunder in the peaceful quiet of early evening. The horse had been dozing with his head resting on Samuel's shoulder, and Samuel found himself thinking about the year ahead with anticipation rather than dread. "What do you think, old friend?" Samuel asked quietly, ready for another year of helping hurt souls learn to trust again. Thunder lifted his head and looked directly into Samuel's eyes, and in that gaze, Samuel saw everything he needed to know about the year ahead. They would continue their work together, helping other wounded animals find their way back to home. They would face whatever challenges came with the quiet courage they had learned from each other. And they would prove, again and again, that love really was the most powerful force for healing in the world. As the church bells rang midnight in the distance, welcoming the new year, Samuel wrapped his arms around Thunder's neck and whispered the words that had become his daily prayer. "Thank you for teaching me that broken things can become beautiful again." Thunder's gentle nicker seemed to say, "Thank you for believing in me when no one else would." And in that moment, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of the farm they both called home, two souls who had found each other in their darkest hour settled into the quiet confidence of knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The story that had begun with fear and desperation had become a testament to the transformative power of patience, love, and the willingness to believe that healing is always possible, even when it seems impossible. Samuel and Thunder had shocked everyone indeed, not with violence or tragedy, but with the quiet miracle of two broken hearts learning to trust again, and in doing so, discovering that their healing could become a light for others, walking through their own darkness.